Kids are quite different from adults. You have to pay attention. And I think it starts at home because nobody knows a kid as well as the parent of that kid. I mean, I'm talking about parents that are engaged, parents that know their loving parents that know their children. You know your kid. You know when something is different. Some kids are quiet, they don't talk much, In fact, like my own kid, I'll be more alarmed if he starts talking all of a sudden a lot. I'll be a bit alarmed. What's going on here, because it's not somebody that talks a lot. But if you have a kid that's quite chatty and happy and outgoing, and suddenly this kid becomes reclusive, doesn't talk much, even if it's normal teenage behavior, it's a good thing to ask. And you don't just walk up to them, what's wrong with you now? That's not going to work, You know your own kid. You know what's going to bring them out of their shell, You have to learn the skill. And there are books. I read those books when my own kid became a teenager, even though I'm a psychiatrist. There's a book I like, How to Talk So Your Kids Will Listen, and How to Listen So Your Kids Will Talk. There's one for teenagers too. I read that book because it really helped me to understand the language of my kid, to understand the approach, And I know my kid. I know when he's unhappy. I know when he's excited and he's happy. And sometimes if you ask them what's going on, they won't talk. But just give them room, Lay a background of non-judgmental, that you can come to me for anything. I don't care how bad it is. Just come and talk to me or talk to somebody else you trust, So if a kid's just a sudden change in behavior, you have to look into it. If a kid doesn't want to eat anymore, there's a change in diet, It's either maybe the kid that has a good appetite suddenly stops eating, or suddenly starts eating a lot, or suddenly starts sleeping a lot, or not sleeping, or there's a change in they're doing well at school, or doing well in the sports. It may be nothing, but it has to be looked at. Or the kid suddenly starts, misbehaving, smoking, using drugs, or promiscuity. Now, why it's a bit difficult is that even kids that are not, that there's nothing going on. These things happen in teenage years as kids grow up, influences different things. And that's why I think kids at that level, apart from parents, apart from coaches that are engaged with them, I think these kids need to be provided with somebody who provides mental health therapy for them.
Well, Andrea, how do clubs know? I think there should be a procedure in place of speaking to the athlete, speaking to the parent. Is there someone they go to? I mean, they don't know if something's wrong. It could easily be ignored, which is the worrying thing, easily brushed aside. So, yeah, I don't know how they would know, Andrea.
I think it's all about knowing your athletes, starting the conversation as small as it is. How are you feeling today? How was the training session? And if it's that constant, they're constantly down, or you can sort of sense it, and it's that constant. I think it's really important that the swimmer feels they can communicate as well. There's nothing harder, I suppose, as a young person, if you are struggling with something, to talk to someone, have a conversation. Just tell your coach, look, I'm feeling a little bit down. I'm not quite, feeling that my training is going well. It's hard to do as a young swimmer and a young person, but it's having those tools to start that conversation. And once you start that conversation and then the coach is aware, and then you can try and, the coach can then try and work on ways of, identifying that it isn't just, a one-off. There's something repeating. There's something that's happening, and then they can then go down the channels that they need to get some support for this person. Whether those support systems are in place as much as they should is always another conversation. But I think as long as, the things the fact that we are here today talking about this is a massive positive, right? Because we're starting to build awareness that in swimming clubs, especially, obviously that's what we're talking about, that there are these issues on a daily basis, and what do we need to sort of put in place to help our children be confident to start the conversation, help the coaches to know the signs and what to look for, and then look into the processes of how we help this individual. And I want to stress individual, because everyone's different. I've trained a lot of people over my time as a coach, and every single person is slightly different in terms of their personality. I've coached grumpy swimmers, I've coached happy swimmers. Just because someone's happy, that might mean they're sort of masking their mental health. If they're grumpy, sometimes they're just grumpy all the time. So it's knowing and identifying those things as a coach, and then putting those processes in place.
Yeah, so it's not just anxiety. For me, I guess the easiest way to describe it is anxiety would be an extreme form of nerves, right? So you have, your negative thoughts start to spiral. You might have a really negative physiological response where you start to feel heavy and your heart rate goes up and you sweat. Extreme cases, and we see this quite a lot in swimming, is individuals being sick, unfortunately, and it's a horrible experience for someone to go through. And unfortunately, when we've had that experience in the past, we become almost anxious about that happening again. So, sports psychology isn't just about dealing with anxiety, but maybe an example to give of how we'd treat someone with anxiety. Performance anxiety shows up in many different ways. So it might look very different to other people. It might be around excessively high standards that they have from themselves. So a common pattern that we see in performance anxiety is perfectionism. And unfortunately, swimming is a sport that lends itself to perfectionism. We're always looking for that extra millisecond. It's a sport that's based on outcomes and times and PBs and achievements. And that can drive a lot of these worries about needing to be perfect and needing to get everything right. Performance anxiety might also look like the fear of letting people down, letting your coaches down, perhaps letting your parents down, because not even if your parents are massively supportive, even if they don't put any pressure on you and they just want to see you happy, young children, junior athletes, even adults can still experience anxiety because they worry about letting them down. They want to impress people. They want to make their family and their friends proud. And this can cause some of the symptoms of anxiety as well. So it does show up in lots of different ways. And it's very important not to just group someone and just treat them under the umbrella term of performance anxiety, because it shows up in different ways and it looks very different to different people. But it's important to kind of dig deeper into where this is coming from, what the symptoms are, any causes, any different triggers, so you fully understand how you can go about supporting that individual in the best way.
When 17-year-olds were asked if they had ever hurt themselves in an attempt to end your life, 7% replied yes. When asked if they had ever self-harmed during the previous year, 24% responded that they had. The Millennium Cohort Study.